Fintech Chatter Podcast, brought to you by Tier 1 People, the leaders in executive search for fintech ventures.
Tim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dexter. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for coming down to Sydney and joining me in my office.
Yeah, it's great to be here. The key reason that you're here is I just really think it's fantastic to see innovation on the fin side of fintech that we haven't really showcased very often on the show. And I guess, the kind of purpose as well for what this innovation is about is just something that for me, that is the end goal. That is kind of really the essence of what fintech, started out to be, certainly from my perspective and that of my network. But before I blab on anymore, do you want to maybe tell our listeners about Hope Housing and the big problem that you solve?
Yeah, happy to. So I think the way I think about the problem, Dexter, is sort of in two parts or two sides of the same coin. The first big problem we're here to solve is that wealth in Australia, investors are really struggling to access residential property, the biggest asset class in this country, with a strong long-term growth characteristics and really interesting diversifying effects in portfolio, which they just can't access. So there's no way for that institutional capital or even the high net worth family offices and foundations to access that in an efficient way. The other part of that side of that problem is essential workers in Australia, or Australians generally, are struggling to get into home ownership.
Yeah.
And home ownership is so critical for their future well-being, their future wealth, a whole range of social and family situations. So we have workers, essential workers that we're focusing on, police, nurses, teachers, are sort of the types that we generally talk to, but it's a very broad definition. Now getting into a situation where they either don't own homes and more likely to be renting and retiring in poverty, or they're living a long way away from homes. In fact, we had a recent case study. Sophie, who's we just recently supported, she's a nurse at St Vincent's. She used to live in your neck of the woods,
really?
Newcastle.
Wow.
She was travelling from Newcastle down to St Vincent's Hospital one
Wow.
day. She's telling me, Dexter, I'm having micro sleeps in the car too.
Yeah.
I'm here at the ICU trying to support people into home ownership. I'm here trying to support people in my work, and I can't get into home ownership.
Yeah.
So that's a really simple case study. And then if I go back to the other side of the coin, Dexter, we just had a investor come in, Tim Norton. He's a very classic, self-made multi-millionaire in Australia. He's been a landlord, and that's the only way he's been able to get into property. And he saw hope. He said, "Well, this is fantastic. I can now get into property without all those headwinds and headaches and costs associated with being a landlord. And I'm getting a much bigger exposure. I'm getting much more diversification. I can do it at scale." So that's the problem in
Awesome.
these two sides of that coin.
One of the reasons I love fintech, Tim, and I love recruiting in fintech is I've been doing this 25 years, and when you do the same thing for 25 years, it gets boring. The complexity of fintech, I think, is what really kind of keeps me stimulated. Not only do you have to find unique people who can operate in that kind of startup, small business mentality, but then you've got the regulatory and compliance burdens and challenges and problems to solve that come with that. How have you solved some of the kind of regulatory kind of issues around that would have prevented perhaps others from applying a similar model previously?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dexter. I think I guess my starting point on that is, and you've mentioned it, I know this is a fintech podcast, but when when I started Hope, I never started with the view of this will be a fintech initiative. I always saw fintech as sort of an enabler in what I'm trying to do. So where I started with was here is a problem of enabling people into home ownership. How do we develop a product, a solution, a model that fairly treats those people into home ownership, balances their interests with the interests of investors who are ultimately the capital providers to support. And as soon as you started approaching something that says, let's look at fairness, balance, and making sure the interests of both parties are evenly met. Yeah. You kind of start then moving through fairly quickly some of the regulatory various challenges, because it's about...
So regulatory guidelines and barriers work then,
It's about solution. And then when you start applying, once you work through that solution and you start then saying, well, how do we make it more efficient, more accessible? That's where you start applying some of that fintech language and fintech thinking into that problem.
I think the interesting thing for me is, the kind of word fintech, it means a different thing to every person that I speak to. And ultimately, kind of before the term fintech, I was still working with fintech businesses. They just weren't called that. And I think at the time we were all focused on innovation. And that term innovation, I think, has been misused as well. And it's kind of led itself more to what I would say have been efficiencies internally for businesses than it has been in innovative products or innovative ways of solving problems for customers. How did you get the kind of inspiration for Hope, and also kind of get the inspiration about being really innovative around tackling the problem?
So I guess I got to credit part of the inspiration to my business partner and backer, Tim Sims. Tim Sims has been successful in private equity in a commercial sense. I've worked for him in Pacific Equity Partner portfolio company, so he has known me well. We've been working together in a commercial sense for close to 20 odd years. And the inspiration really came from our relationship and our continually looking for opportunities to work together, and the realisation that we both have been very lucky in our roles, in our positions. We've learnt a lot. We've developed a lot of skills and knowledge. And recognising within our communities, and he's very connected in with essential workers. His wife was a nurse. His brother's a police officer. And as I was mentioning to you before we came on, I've got 3 boys, and I'm starting to talk to them about their future careers, and I see wanting to give them as many options. From a point of view of working, across different sectors, or giving them at least the capability of working across different sectors. With that influence, we're sort of thinking, well, how can we apply, what we've learned into solving what's a really significant problem right now? Not just for the essential workers that are here and now working today in our various industries that we really need, and they support us, but that future generation, that's coming through. That's really the inspiration here. It's sort of recognising that, in life you are given opportunity, you develop capability, and you've got to be always looking for the opportunities to how do you give back to share that and support that.
Yeah, look, it is an interesting point that you make, and I think one of the things that has really fascinated me, certainly with the Australian kind of startup space, is, the VC have kind of acted almost like private equity. What benefits have you seen kind of applying the private equity way of thinking and approaching business growth, with Hope Housing versus saying if you'd have gone the VC route and looked to get seed capital and raise money and kind of, get a load of investors in early, multiple investors, and you're just trying to get a product out to market.
You ask all the hard questions.
You know what? And this wasn't on script, but it was when you mentioned it. I just thought, wow, that this is, this is really interesting to hear about an earlier stage business having private equity kind of thinking around it, because it's something that I'm highly supportive of.
I think there's, for me, it's really focusing on understanding the problem. And looking at how you can develop a product or a solution or an experience around solving that problem. So not starting with a product. So when I started with Hope, when Tim and I sort of sat down and said, look, we have a really clear view of the product.
Yeah.
We shook hands and said, look, let's get on this journey and see what we can do to solve it. We had it was a blank sheet of paper. It took us collaboratively with working with others in the industry, and getting consultants and talking to industry experience on, what does Hope actually look like? What is the Hope solution? How does it solve the balance that we need to be able to solve in this space between investor interests and homeowner interests? You can't be too far skewed on one way, and you see product out there that skews to investor interests, and it may have an initial kicker, but has no market to pick it up, eventually dies, or it skews too far to the consumer or the homeowner interest in this case, which is really nice and altruistic. Yeah. But eventually doesn't get the traction it needs. So I think, there's no magic in that. There's no sort of formula I could sort of lay down on the table, apart from just always mindful of that. Yeah. That balance, and because we're dealing with a key piece of social infrastructure here, being home ownership. It's really important to get. Yeah. Sorry.
It's just fascinating to hear you share that, right? Because I think if I look at, I think one of the challenges that's faced the industry here in Oz is, with a fairly immature and early venture capital industry, it's lacked the experience to, be able to help businesses grow, right? That's just inevitable. That's not a slight on anyone. That's just a fact. And if I look at some of the kind of things where I hear founders talking and sharing stories, it's almost like they've been given this magic formula that you take from a highly successful Silicon Valley tech startup, and if you apply that magic formula here in Australia, it should work, and it doesn't. And the reason being is it's just very, very different markets. And I think the other challenge is taking a formula that works in a tech startup and applying that to a finance business that's using technology to help it grow. Usually you're then measuring a lot of the wrong metrics. So it's really fascinating to hear you kind of share that the kind of strategy and the plan has really been about how we solve this problem and make sure everybody's a winner.
And how you evolve what eventually the solution is. So taking your point, when I started researching what potential solutions, you always go international. That's kind of the place you start. You look domestically and see what others are doing. And you've got to ask yourself, how is this going to suit this problem solution? It's not a lift and shift. Yeah. So shared equity is a model in Hope Housing where, as I was talking about Sophie earlier and our one of our investors, Tim Norton, it's saying, okay, what is this model? How does it work? It is effectively saying shared equity Sophie, you go and work with your bank, and this is that connection with Greg you mentioned earlier, Greg McKenna, Police Bank, who's an absolute leader, a gentleman, and a strong advocate for hope. So we've partnered with Police Bank. So for you go into the bank, you organise half, your financing for half a house, and through the Hope Fund, we'll give you equity for the other half of the house, effectively matching that mortgage amount. But in addition, what we say is, bank and Sophie, this is about housing affordability, but the definition of affordability for us is very precise, not about a discount to the market, not about a trade-off of return. Affordability is the amount that you are servicing on this portion of your home must be less than 30% of your salary, your take home.
Yeah.
And so that enables Sophie not only to get in an affordable way, it gives her an ability to start a journey. And that journey, Dexter, is from a 50% ownership share of a wealth producing asset to progressively moving to 100% ownership share. So she has the opportunity to buy us out. Now that is essentially the product, and you start there getting that balance, and you start getting those metrics right, and you think about the risk and return elements, and then we overlay that fintech component that you talk about, and overlay that the recognition that this is a journey this is not a one-off consuming a product. This is a journey now, a life's a life journey for all the Sophies of the world that will progress through to home ownership.
And how many people have you been able to help so far?
Yeah, so we're still very early stages. We started in October 2022.
Yeah.
And I was really keen, because around the table there's a lot of institutional capital.
Yeah.
Saying, Tim, we really like what you do. We're interested in your model. We can see the value. But where's this track record? Show us actually working in practice. Show us working in practice. That's a disco. Okay. Well, chicken the egg. So we started very small back in 2022, and I've supported 26 essential workers into homes. And what's really important about that, Dexter, it actually demonstrates that this model works. The model works from a banking distribution strategy. The model works from a homeowner purchasing strategy. And it works from an investor getting into the market, now getting the purest form of exposure to residential property. And over that time, not only have we supported those 26 workers in, we've delivered growth double what the market's been doing back to investors. So our portfolio ending June 2024 over the last 12 months has grown just over 12%. And if you look at the indexes, CoreLogic's the one that's generally quoted, All Sydney Dwelling Index is 6%. So you guys, well, how'd you do that? I mean, we've got a process. This is really what's part of, and this is where some of the fintech comes in. We've got a process that takes people on a journey, which hasn't ever existed in the marketplace before. Dexter. What happens in the market when someone buys home? They go in the bank. Bank gives them a wad of cash. They're left to fend for themselves in a marketplace that has a whole bunch of information, but a whole bunch of competition, and then hopefully at the end come to the end with a home ownership or some level of home ownership. So what we do is we say, well, look at that journey. How do we support them from the very point of them getting a pre-approval from a finance perspective, helping them through our fintech buy well, digitising a buying experience, supporting them to not only get into home ownership, but get the right property with the proper due diligence, with an unemotional view, and enable them now to not only live in that property, but also have an ability to buy us out and increase our wealth.
Yeah.